Neil Armstrong stepped carefully down the ladder of the lunar lander. His boots pressed into the soft gray dust of the moon. Above him, the sky was black. There was no air, so there were no clouds or blue sky, just stars shining like tiny pinholes of light. Armstrong paused for a moment, then placed one foot on the surface. His voice crackled through the radio. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The moon was silent and still. The dust beneath his feet was fine like powder and clung to everything. Armstrong looked around. The land was covered in hills and craters, untouched for millions of years. Soon Buzz Aldrin joined him. Together they walked slowly, like they were bouncing. Every move they made was watched by millions of people on Earth, holding their breath. For the first time in history, humans were walking on another world. The Apollo 11 moon landing was the most exciting moment of what became known as the space race. The space race began after World War II. The world had changed. The United States and the Soviet Union, now called Russia, became the two most powerful countries. But they didn't trust each other. They were in a Cold War, which means they were not fighting each other with actual weapons, but with ideas, spying, technology, and power. One way they tried to show who was stronger was through space exploration. The Soviet Union made the first big move. On October 4th, 1957, they shocked the world by launching the first satellite into space. It was called Sputnik, which means companion in Russian. Sputnik was small, only about the size of a beach ball, but it made history. It weighed 184 pounds and had 4 long metal legs sticking out. It sent out a steady beep-beep signal as it orbited the Earth once every 96 minutes. It didn't do much else, but it proved that the Soviets had powerful rockets and that they were ahead in space technology. People in the United States were stunned. Newspapers printed headlines in big letters. Families turned on their radios to hear news about the satellite flying above them. Some Americans were proud of the scientific progress, but many were scared. If the Soviet Union could send a satellite into space, some wondered, could they also send bombs? Could they spy from above? The launch of Sputnik made space feel closer and more dangerous. It started a race between the US and the Soviet Union to see who could go higher, faster, and farther into space. The US quickly started working harder. In 1958, the country created NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA's job was to explore space and help the US catch up. But the Soviet Union stayed ahead. In 1961, a Soviet astronaut named Yuri Gagarin became the first human to go to space. He flew around the Earth in a spaceship called Vostok 1. He became a hero around the world. Just a few weeks later, the U.S. sent astronaut Alan Shepard into space. His flight lasted only 15 minutes, but it showed that America was catching up. Then in May 1961, President John F. Kennedy gave a famous speech. He said the United States should send a man to the moon and bring him back safely before the decade was over. It was a bold goal. At that time, the U.S. had only just started sending people into space. The moon was nearly 240,000 miles away. NASA began the Apollo program to make the moon landing possible. It was a bold and difficult goal, and it didn't happen overnight. It took years of hard work, careful planning, and many tests. There were setbacks along the way. Some rockets exploded during launch. Some missions had to be canceled or changed. At times it seemed like the dream of reaching the moon might be too hard to achieve. But each test and mission gave scientists and engineers new knowledge. They learned from every mistake and improved their designs. They built stronger rockets that could travel farther and carry more weight. They made safer spacesuits to protect astronauts from extreme heat, cold, and lack of air. They also created better computers and navigation systems. Astronauts trained for hours every day, learning how to live and work in space, and even how to walk in zero gravity where everything floats. Every step brought them closer to the moon. In 1968, the Apollo 8 mission sent 3 men around the moon. They did not land, but they became the first humans to see the far side of the moon with their own eyes. They took a famous photo of Earth rising over the moon's horizon. People back home saw that picture and were amazed. Earth looked small and beautiful, a blue ball floating in space. Finally, on July 16, 1969, the Apollo 11 mission blasted off. 3 astronauts were on board: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. 4 days later, the spaceship reached the moon. Collins stayed in orbit while Armstrong and Aldrin entered a small lander called the Eagle. As the Eagle got close to the surface, alarms went off. The computer was overloaded. Armstrong had to land the ship by hand. With only a few seconds of fuel left, he touched down safely. Then came the moment the world had been waiting for. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped out of the lander and onto the moon. He said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." People all over the world watched on TV. Some cheered, some cried. Armstrong and Aldrin spent about 2.5 hours walking on the surface. They picked up moon rocks, set up science tools, and planted an American flag. Then they returned to the lander and met back with Collins to head home. When the Apollo 11 crew splashed down in the ocean and returned to Earth, they were heroes. The space race had reached its greatest victory. The United States had done what once seemed impossible. Later, the United States and Russia, once fierce rivals, began working together in space. In the 1990s, they helped build the International Space Station, IISS, along with other countries like Canada, Japan, and members of the European Space Agency. The ISS orbits high above Earth and serves as a space laboratory where astronauts from many nations live and work side by side. They do experiments in science, medicine, and technology. They study how the human body reacts to living in space for long periods. It is one of the biggest examples of global teamwork in history. The lessons of the space race about working hard, solving problems, and dreaming big did not end with the moon landing. They opened the door to a new era of exploration. Other countries began reaching for the stars too. In recent years, China has made great progress. It sent its own astronauts, called taikonauts, into space. China built its own space station called Tiangong, which means heavenly palace. They've also sent spacecraft to the moon and Mars, showing that space exploration now belongs to the whole world, not just 2 countries. The space race started as a competition, but it grew into something more. It showed that with smart ideas, courage, and cooperation, people can achieve amazing things. Space travel is no longer just about being first. It is about learning, exploring, and reaching beyond what we thought was possible. Today, the stars belong to everyone, and the journey continues.